Right now, we're talking presidential politics, and I don't understand what's going here. Jeff McCall, professor of media studies at DePauw University. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Tommy.
Thanks for taking the time with us. I'm going to get to the media in a second. Just to fill you in, we've been talking about the Republicans and some of the hardcore conservatives trying to mount a third-party candidate. Among the names being mentioned are Mark Cuban, the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, and I don't understand that for the life of me, how you would purposely blow up the election and say, all right, you know what, we're going to stick to our values as we perceive them and let the Democratic nominee get in the White House. But all that aside, is the media treating Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton equally, or is there always a tinge of how do we stop Donald Trump from getting in the White House?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind here is that the media has leaned left for a long time, and so I think it's pretty clear that the media is not, I guess, quote-unquote fair. But I think it's worth pointing out that it's maybe more nuanced than that. And one of the reasons is that you've got a lot of young people working in the journalism industry. They're college-educated, which means they probably were in journalism schools or humanities programs, and those are kind of hotbeds of left-leaning thought. And most reporters go into their jobs as crusaders where they think they are saving the world. So they want to think a little bit more, quote-unquote, progressively, so to speak. But if you want some examples just of like how the media has been treating the Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, which, matchup, which is presumably what we're going to see, you don't have to go too much further than to just watch Good Morning America either yesterday or today. And one of the issues is that the lead political reporter for Good Morning America is George Stephanopoulos. He used to work for the Clintons.
Right.
He donates to the Clinton Foundation. And he's the guy trying to interview Donald Trump, and he's the guy narrating the pieces. And the piece yesterday was all about, Trump, and he misrepresented himself in a PR move 30 years ago. And then today they basically just ran Hillary Clinton's notion that, Trump is nasty to women, and they had all these examples of things he'd said about women over the years. So in a sense, the Hillary Clinton campaign almost wrote the pieces for Good Morning America the last two mornings, and there was really hardly anything that would have given anybody a sense that Trump has resonated with a certain part of the population, and people maybe should try to think about why that is.
There's an adage that says no publicity is bad publicity, and some would make the case that Donald Trump has been the beneficiary of a ton of media coverage. And does it matter to Trump's base, or if you support a candidate, whether it's negative, and if anything, does that make you rally around him or her more?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I think there is such a thing as bad publicity, but it depends on who's listening. I think for the Hillary supporters, they see these negative stories about Trump in the New York Times or wherever they're coming from, and I think that hardens their support for Hillary. For the people who are really convinced that Trump is their guy, I'm not sure that, they're maybe not watching Good Morning America or reading the New York Times or the Washington Post anyway, so it may not make a difference for them. But I do think that Trump benefits from staying in the news, and I would say that it would, I think, behoove him and his people to try to find some things to talk about that would be a little bit more positive. And even the New York Times piece over the weekend that chronicled Trump's problems, quote-unquote, with women over the years, Trump basically responded all weekend with tweets about, that was a hit piece, that was a hit piece. I'm thinking, okay, I would do that but dismiss it because he really needs to talk about something else. And when he's talking about the things that matter to him, that's what gets his voters inspired.
Would it be better, first off, for somebody to wrestle him to the ground and take his phone away from him? And secondly, to just ignore stories like that? Or is by his, if you want to call it celebrity status, famous, infamous, however you look at him, that all he's doing is letting people know about, as you said, stories in the Washington Post or Good Morning America that they would not otherwise have known of?
Yeah, I don't think he can ignore things, and frankly, I think that was a problem with Romney 4 years ago, is that he seemed to ignore a lot of the attacks coming at him, and a lot of that stuff stuck then. I mean, it strikes me as odd that, Romney just seems like a pretty polished, decent gentleman, but he got the thing wrapped around his neck about how he was insensitive to women as well. Remember the binders full of women kind of stuff? I mean, how can you make Romney out to be anti-woman? And there's no evidence necessarily. And certainly Trump's got more of that against him. But I do think you have to respond, but I don't think you respond and keep going. I think you respond and move on. I mean, when Trump's talking about immigration policy, when he's talking about, making America great, when he's talking about trying to create jobs, those are the kinds of things that people seem to be resonating for him.
Let me take a break here. When we come back, if you have a couple more minutes, I want to talk about the third-party candidate. Some of the hardcore conservative Republicans are suggesting that Mitt Romney's name has been mentioned. In terms of media buys and how much money they would have to spend on this, even to make this viable, what kind of money would you be looking at? And, of course, there is the problem of not being on a ballot in some states, et cetera. But I guess what I'm wondering more about is the media aspect of this. And, you're talking about almost the end of May here, mounting a presidential campaign. 7:22, more with Jeff McCall, professor of media studies at DePauw University. Right now, though, it's time for WWL Traffic. Tommy Tucker talking to Jeff McCall, professor of media studies at DePauw University, about Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton as far as the presidential campaign goes, and are the two being treated fairly? So there's this company called Quant, and I'm sure, Professor, you're aware of them. Basically, they compute, I guess, how much free media you get or how that compares with media buys.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So they're saying that Donald Trump benefited from, as of March, about $1.9 billion in free media. Hillary Clinton, about 700-something million. And as we said before, there can be some bad publicity. They say they rate stories that are negative a little bit less than, or weigh them less than they do positive. But when it comes to a third candidate, as some Republicans are suggesting, I don't know, in terms of name recognition, in terms of the free publicity, which I guess would make a big splash at first, it's going to cost about $1 billion, they say now, to become president, which is the most ever, and that's just in the general campaign. Is there any plausible way that a third candidate could either buy enough media or get enough media, free attention between now and the general election to be a legitimate candidate and to make the American people aware of them?
I just don't see any way that a third-party candidate could get enough attention and time in the media to get enough traction to make themselves prominent enough to be considered seriously. I mean, part of it is that they want free media, and they would get a little bit early on. Mm-hmm. But part of the problem is they're going up against the champion of free media, and that's Trump. And whatever a third-party candidate might be, they're not going to be able to upstage Trump. And the traditional media are going to continue to want to talk about the Trump versus Hillary battle royale. And they will treat a third-party candidate as a fringe or a novelty. And one way to look at how I think the media would cover a third-party candidate is to look at how they've treated Bernie Sanders. Look at Sanders. I mean, he keeps winning primaries. He's gotten a pretty good number of votes around the country. He's raised pretty much money. But every story about Sanders is, well, he can't win, he's a fringe candidate, he's from Vermont, and all those kinds of things. So then the rhetoric of the stories is always, Sanders can't win, and any third-party candidate would be covered in the same kind of rhetorical approach, that they can't win and there's no reason for them to be there. And I'm not a presidential historian, but I do remember enough to know that George Wallace was the last third party to win any electoral votes, and of course he gave the election to Nixon. John Anderson ran a third party campaign in 1980. That didn't go anywhere. Ross Perot actually put Bill Clinton in the White House twice by siphoning off votes from Republicans, and Ralph Nader put George Bush in the White House by siphoning off votes from Al Gore. So I don't think there's really any productive path for a third-party candidate to come in here and do anything except just get in the way of what otherwise should be an annual debate about the two major party candidates.
Professor, I appreciate your time. I really do. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you join us again.
I'd be happy to, Tommy. Thank you.
You bet. Professor Jeff McCall, professor of media studies at DePauw University.